Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Originally, this was going to be a single episode on fascia, but as I was recording, I realized that there was really no way for me to do this topic justice in one conversation, because it really is so much more than just connective tissue. It touches every system in the body, as we're going to get into. It influences circulation, movement, lymphatic flow, nervous system regulation, and even the way that we experience ourselves in the world. So I've divided it into two parts for you. In today's episode, we're going to build the foundation. We'll explore what fascia is, why it matters, and why I believe it might be one of the most important and overlooked systems in modern medicine. Then in part two, we'll move into the clinical applications, how fascial patterns show up in real patients, how tension in our body becomes chronic, how trauma and nervous system dysregulation become embodied, and why restoring movement and communication throughout the body can be such a powerful part of your healing journey. So let's begin with a simple question. Do you know what fascia is? Hi. Today, we're beginning a conversation that might completely change the way you understand the human body. And I don't say that lightly, but I do think that once you begin to see the body through the lens of fascia, it becomes really difficult to go back to seeing the body as a collection of separate parts. You're going to start to see relationship everywhere. You're going to see that the nervous system, immune system, hormonal system, lymphatic system, musculoskeletal system, and emotional body are not having separate conversations. They're one conversation. And fascia is one of the places where that conversation is happening. One of the reasons I recorded this episode was because I was looking at a PubMed article. I was sharing some information with a patient, and this was a 2024 article titled Fascia as a Regulatory System in Health and Disease. And so even if you're not a perimenopausal or menopausal woman, I think this conversation is really important. But there's one particular section of that study that was describing that research has discovered an abundance of estrogen and relaxin receptors in fascia concentrated in fibroblasts of muscular fascia. And then they went on to say that this had major consequences for women who are going through hormonal fluctuations, both throughout the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, and the onset of perimenopause. They even went so far as to say, quote, people experiencing perimenopause and menopause may subsequently be more susceptible to fibromyalgia, which is diffuse pain and pain in different trigger points throughout the body, in the absence of premenopausal hormone concentration. So this conversation is really important. Now, fascia is protective tissue. It is responding to us all of the time. And if we live in chronic stress, fear, hypervigilance, or bracing long enough, which I know you've heard me talk about on this podcast, then eventually our connective tissue begins reflecting those states too. And I've been applying this idea to my work with patients for years now. Understanding fascia this way completely changes how you work with healing, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, and I'm so excited for our conversation today. You see, I see human beings as continuous organisms. We're constantly adapting to our environments. I'm always looking at multiple layers and levels of existence, and I'm really trying to explain complicated, complex processes to patients in a way that translates into, okay, now what are you going to go do at home every day when I'm not there? And fascia is one of the places that all of these concepts really intersect. I didn't want to record this episode because fascia has suddenly become a trendy wellness topic, although I do think it is something that people are becoming more aware of. There was an article in the New York Times, I forget what the title was, but it was actually there were a couple. There was one on the interstitium, and then there was one a few years ago on the lymphatic system and how, medicine doesn't know about it. I remember sitting there laughing like, yes, medicine does know about it. Maybe not conventional medicine where you're being given a pill, but certainly healing arts, certainly naturopathic physicians, Chinese medicine practitioners, acupuncturists, anyone who's doing hands-on somatic work. We know about these dynamics. We know about the extracellular matrix, which I'll have an episode on, but it is becoming a little bit more trendy. And so I felt like it was a good time to record this episode. I certainly haven't found one magic fascia protocol. You'll learn throughout this episode that moving and movement is key to healthy fascia. A lot of our seeds of health speak to fascia. I have an entire lymphatic and fascia support seed of health when I'm using yoga and blocks and talking about the diaphragm and breath work with patients and herbs. All of these contribute to health of fascia. And like so many things that I see clinically, these are not all separate conversations. As a naturopathic physician, and in our conversation around the philosophy of healing and all those therapeutic order episodes that we've had, we're number one, looking to remove obstacles to cure. And number two, creating the conditions for health to exist. And fascia exists on both these levels. So I had to record this episode. Imagine you're a woman coming into my office and you're burnt out, you're in chronic pain. Maybe you have pelvic floor dysfunction, TMJ and migraines. Maybe you've been told by a specialist now that you also have POTS and mast cell activation, and you're hypermobile, and you've always had gut issues and some hormonal dysregulation. And now you feel like your nervous system is overwhelmed all the time and it goes back and forth between anxiety and depression. Well, so much of this exhausted, inflamed, overwhelmed, disconnected from ourself, I don't feel like myself anymore picture, it might describe you, right? Because this is what I hear from women all the time, but these are not isolated diagnoses. This is a human organism, a body, mind, spirit struggling to regulate. And that's why I talk about the nervous system all the time, which is inextricably linked with our fascia. One of the systems, the system that we're talking about today, underneath all of that, essentially the scaffolding holding all of that is fascia. And the deeper that I got into nervous system work with patients and gut brain axis healing and HPA axis dysregulation, as a root cause practitioner, really trying to figure out what the most important intervention first for a patient was, it just was so clear to me. All of this is connected through fascia, and I really want to explain that deeper today. Now, if you've heard the word fascia before, it was maybe in a yoga class or from a massage therapist or a friend talking about how their trauma is stored in their body, and you thought, what does that mean? Do I have trauma stored in my body? And while parts of all of those conversations are absolutely pointing towards something real, I also think that it's become a little bit overly simplified. Because fascia is not just wrapping material, and emotions are not literally trapped in your hips, for example. What's happening is so much more organized and intelligent and dynamic than that. There's a lot of physiology going on, there's a lot of interconnections and communication pathways, right? So, yes, you can think about fascia as a wrapping system. So, it's wrapping everything. It's actually connecting and communicating with every system of our body. You can think of it as a sheath. You might picture it almost as if you imagine, my daughter loves those squishies, those squishy toys, and you can imagine as a balloon maybe that you squeeze that has fluid inside, and the outer sheath, the wrapping, you could picture as the fascia. Or if you've ever cut the connective tissue layer off of meat, if you're a meat eater. So it wraps every nerve, every muscle fiber, every blood vessel, every lymphatic vessel. All of your organs are wrapped in fascia, each layer of the nervous system. It's a separator and a connector all at the same time, and it's receiving information, acting somewhat as an antenna. In many ways, it's one of the only tissue systems in the body that truly has a direct communication or relationship with everything else. Everything is connected through fascia. Even inside muscles, there's an incredible connective tissue organization happening continuously and communicating. Fascia is wrapping those individual muscle fibers and then bundling our muscle fibers and then wrapping around entire muscle groups. So it expands outward in fascial sheets like your IT band or your thoracolumbar fascia, and it transitions into tendons that then attach muscle to bone. The ligaments themselves are connective tissue structures that connect bone to bone through fascia. Fascia is surrounding all of our blood vessels, and it's influencing pressure regulation and fluid movement throughout the organism. So in further episodes, when we talk more in depth about the extracellular matrix and interstitium, or you can go back and listen to conversations we've had around the lymphatic system, all of these are communication systems, yes, but they're also moving nutrients into cells, and they're detoxing and bringing waste products out. Fascia is connected to all of this. The lymphatic system itself lives largely within the superficial fascial system, which means lymphatic movement and all of that connective tissue health are just so deeply intertwined. So right now, I want to stay focused on the fascia, but as you can see, we can go so many directions with this. And that's why working on this layer of health can be so impactful. Your organs are suspended in fascia. I remember in cadaver lab in medical school when we were working with fascia, I was really fascinated by it. I think of it almost every day in my yoga practice when I'm assessing my tension for that day, or I'm thinking about where I need to open and release. Our fascia is connecting and supporting those organs. So it's also surrounding our brain and our spinal cord. It's communicating and really setting the stage for the state of our autonomic nervous system, as well as receiving input around that. So biologically, it's everywhere. Its continuity is everywhere, but it's made from, if you wanted to break it down into more reductionistic parts, it's made from collagen, elastin, water, glycoproteins, ground substance, and specialized connective tissue cells like fibroblasts. So collagen is giving it strength. And now I'm not saying just go take collagen and you have healthy fascia. There's so much more that's going to go into this conversation. Elastin allows it to recoil and have adaptability and flexibility. And that hydrated ground substance acts like a fluid gel medium. So it's crystalline but fluid in ways. And it's really allowing tissues to glide. It's absorbing force. So it's protecting our organs. As I said, it's exchanging information, and it's communicating mechanically and chemically. Now, healthy fascia should not feel rigid or stuck. It's meant to be adaptable and responsive, elastic and hydrated. So if you're dehydrated, your fascia is going to be tighter. It's going to be less fluid and gel-like. And it really is how we're moving and gliding, and we have these fluid movements along different planes. But what's really fascinating to me is that it's not just structural tissue. So it's not just important for movement or health of our muscles or flexibility, but it's relational. So every part of our body is in relationship and communication with fascia. And that means that it's constantly involved in how we're communicating with ourselves. So force and tension are distributed across it, but also information. And once you begin to see that information pathway as so important for getting information to other parts of our body, right? And for our body to heal, then it becomes really obvious why I say things like stagnation is the breeding ground for disease, right? And our nervous system is no longer separate from our movement then, because if you have adhesions, if you have stagnation or rigidity in the fascia, or you have scar tissue even, which is buildup of this connective tissue, then communication can't move. So it's not only that you're restricted in your physical movement, but within your body, communication pathways are not moving. Neurotransmitters aren't being communicated through the body, hormones, different nutrients, as I mentioned before, toxins. So fascia becomes important in every aspect of movement and communication, both within and without the cells of our body. So you can see how it's going to then contribute to things like inflammation, like emotional processing, and this continuous adaptive network is one of the reasons fascia became so also philosophically profound to me, because it's not just a structural biomechanical conversation. It becomes a conversation about embodiment, about how do I feel in my body. When a woman comes in with some of those issues that I mentioned before, a lot of the ones I described have a component of tension or bracing or tightness. And then I would see that in her mind, she was also tense, tight, hypervigilant. And when I use the phrase to experience life fully human and deeply healed, it means living inside of our human body and feeling safe and comfortable in our human body. And this, I think, is a really big key to healing. We talk all about how your body has to be in a healing state to heal, right? Our autonomic nervous system health and our parasympathetic sympathetic balance all sets us up for healing or not healing. And I think that modern research is really finally recognizing that fascia is not inert tissue. It's so richly innervated. It contains mechanoreceptors, nociceptors, pressure receptors, interoceptive receptors, and it's essentially guiding that autonomic relationship. So if we're scanning internally and externally for safety or danger, fascia is the communication pathway through which we're receiving that information. One paper I was reading described fascia as a watchman for the organism, continuously receiving and processing information about the internal and external environment. And clinically, that's what I see. So it's, yes, it's responding to load and pressure, but it's also has a lot to do with, well, hydration status, as I mentioned before, and posture, right? How are you carrying or holding yourself? Are you hunched over? Are you standing upright? There's such a detailed, intricate relationship between fascia and our diaphragm and our ability to breathe and inspire, to inflammation and stress physiology and emotional state. And before fascia became that watchman essentially for our organism, if you look back embryologically, this is so cool. But if you look back embryologically, you realize that connective tissue is not just some secondary support structure we add later. It's the foundation that we're essentially created from. It's the foundational tissue that our organism is born from. So in very early development, we first become, before we even become this recognizable human form, there's fluid rhythm, energetic dynamics and electrical signaling, and cells are organizing through these tension gradients and communicating. And that is the fascia that we emerge from. Our body is literally born or formed through relationship with self via the fascia. It's what we are coming from. This fascial matrix plays a crucial role in our physical development, but I think then, therefore, also in our spiritual connection. So we're animated by soul or spirit, that vis that activates our tissues, and that's how our spark of life begins. And it's also at the end what ceases to be. Our animation ceases to be, and we contract, and our fascia contracts, and our spirit leaves. And so our spiritual journey can actually be the experience of being alive, of turning inward and connecting inward. And if it helps you to understand that via fascia, I think it's a way to make it a little less complicated. But when we are alive, our fascia behaves not anything like dead material. It's super alive and responsive and intelligent. And it's, as I said, it's sensing and reorganizing around experience and around what's going on in the environment and pressure inputs. And if you imagine just sitting, maybe you're sitting at a computer all day and you're just sitting like this all day long, well, eventually fascia, which is communicating with pressure from gravity in the environment, is going to organize around that. And a lot of times when I'm working with patients who do work on computers, I'm asking them to then go home and lay on a yoga block under their back and open up their chest and open their diaphragm and have a breathwork practice where they're telling their body, you're safe, you can heal, and counteract that effect of gravity in that regular posture. Because we're continually sensing and reorganizing around experience, I started to realize that if I had a patient lay down on the floor in a safe space at home where they felt comfortable and release a tension point or a fascia point and work with the dynamic movement. So say your diaphragm and you're doing a deep breath work practice while you're releasing and relaxing and maybe then dosing a homeopathic remedy or a gemotherapy or a flower essence, I started to really see more of a connection between physiology and spirituality and using those tools to connect the two, because modern culture has really separated them much more than our organism itself does. So if you think about your living dynamic organism, you're made up of water, and we can have a whole episode on structured water too. I think I touched on it quite a bit in the hydrotherapy and hydration episode, but you're made up of water and minerals and electrical signaling. And there's rhythm and relationship built in within this. That's essentially biology. And I think so many ancient healing systems truly understood this. They knew that our organism didn't lack intelligence. They understood that humans were never actually separate from nature to begin with, and that when we're in nature, we're getting essentially negative ions that are grounding us and communicating via this water and via this fascia and telling our body we're safe and able to provide inputs like sunlight, which is so important to these communication pathways. So sometimes I think we've lost a lot of the simplicity that healing traditions have always had. And now we're circling back to that because we're proving it in studies and science, which is cool. But if you just look to ancient healing traditions, they had a lot of this right. You can think of fascia also kind of like strings of an instrument throughout your organism. And yes, it's continually responding and receiving and transmitting information through pressure and movement and rhythm and breath and relationship and frequency. This is partly why those remedies and energetic medicine works, right? But you can also think about those strings when they're chronically tightened through fear or hypervigilance or a trauma, whether that's a physical or emotional trauma, through inflammation and stress physiology and HPA axis dysregulation. Eventually, our whole organism starts to lose coherence. We're no longer in tune. We're no longer vibrating at the frequency with which we can heal. So when our body finally experiences enough safety to soften and release, something else begins emerging too. Patients often say to me that they're able to be more present when we're engaging in something that releases their fascia. So it might look like a yoga block or a massage. It might look like me doing hands-on cranial sacral work. But when you're able to be in the moment, in your body, in safety, more connected, more aware of yourself, more aware and mindful of life around you, this is the place that healing occurs. And this is why contemplative traditions and indigenous systems and yogic traditions understood the body as part of consciousness itself rather than separate from it. The body is the vehicle through which we experience. The body is the vehicle through which our soul can experience life and through which our consciousness is embodied. And if you're really going down mindful tradition paths and talking about transcendence or even in depth psychology, individuation, none of that happens by abandoning the body. The body is the vehicle through which it happens. It happens by becoming fully present within it. And what fascinates me the most is that conventional medicine largely ignored fascia for centuries. And so now, again, as studies are kind of showing the importance of this, we can really circle back to, okay, what are the daily activities that I can be doing as a human who wants to heal and be healthy that will speak to my fascia and that can help contribute to a healthy communication pathway that exists both within me and through which I experience the world and the other nervous systems around me. So yes, I was sitting there super fascinated by fascia in anatomy cadaver lab, but in many labs it's dissected away so students can get to those important structures. And meanwhile, the fascia, that connective tissue around all of those structures, holds so much more than we realized. And I think we've become incredibly skilled at isolating parts while losing relationship. I talk about this a lot, about the therapeutic relationship I have with patients, about the relationship patients need to have with themselves, the relationship between our nervous system and our immune system, between our emotional experience and our physical physiology, between humans and nature. The body itself does not live in fragments. And the more that we try to fragment it, the less healing is occurring. And the diaphragm and the breath are such a great example of this. So you have all this fascia here around your diaphragm. Essentially, that is your diaphragm, right? And so, if you have all of this tension that you're holding here and you just can never relax, of course, you're never going to get that full, deep belly breath. You're maybe going to find it harder to have those longer, slower exhales that activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And your autonomic state, your nervous system state, we talk about this all the time, is going to impact the story in your mind. It's going to strongly impact inflammatory signaling changes in tissue, like that study I was talking about with hormone fluctuations. They're going to change inflammatory pathways and messages. And movement throughout this system and circulation and lymphatic flow is going to change the rate at which these communication pathways can, again, get into that healing state. And that's going to influence neurotransmitters and hormones. And all of that is going to have a giant impact on the mood that you're in. Are you experiencing depression, anxiety, pain? Is that pain feedback loop related to tension physically as the root cause, or is it related to emotional processing? It's going to tie back to energy levels, to adaptability, and again, to that really important concept of safety, feeling safe in the body. And I think that's a good place for us to pause today. Now you know what fascia is and you know why it's important. And now we're going to move on to talking about trigger points, hypermobility, body as armor, nervous system regulation, trauma, and why I ask so many patients in their first visit this very simple question. What are you holding? Where are you bracing in your body? Do you know where you carry your tension and your stress? And what might happen if that pattern no longer had to be there? I'll see you in part 2.